Which of the three brilliant students is hiding a secret that could ruin them all? How will Sherlock Holmes uncover the truth from the tiniest clues before it's too late? Welcome to Classic Storytime Hub. Tonight's tale is The Adventure of the Three Students by Arthur Conan Doyle, a classic tale reimagined and retold for the modern age. It was the year 1895, and a curious twist of fate had brought Sherlock Holmes and me to one of England's famed university towns. The days passed in quiet study, though fate had something unexpected in store for us, a puzzle small in scale but rich in intrigue. Out of respect for those involved, I shall refrain from naming the college or the individuals, for the scandal that unfolded was delicate, and such matters are best left unspoken. Yet the story itself is worth telling, for it reveals once again the astonishing abilities of my extraordinary companion. We had settled into modest lodgings near a grand, quiet library, where Holmes was absorbed in meticulous research on early English charters, a study so detailed it promised revelations that might one day merit their own tale. One evening, a routine was interrupted by a visitor, a man whose anxiety could almost be seen in the tremor of his hands. Mr. Hilton Soames, a tutor and lecturer at St. Luke's College, was a tall, lean man, always somewhat restless, but tonight he was utterly consumed by agitation. "Mr. Holmes," he began, his voice tight with urgency, "I am in desperate need of your assistance. A most troubling matter has arisen at St. Luke's, and were it not for your presence in town, I should be completely at a loss." Holmes, never one to tolerate unnecessary distractions, barely lifted his gaze from his papers. "I am occupied with pressing work," he said calmly. "Matters of this sort are ordinarily best left to the police." But Soames would not be deterred. The tension in the room was palpable, an invisible storm of worry that begged for resolution, and Holmes, as always, was about to discover that even the smallest of mysteries can reveal the sharpest of intellects. "No, no, my dear Mr. Soames," Holmes said firmly, his eyes narrowing. "Once the law is called in, it cannot simply be paused. And yet you insist that this matter must remain quiet for the reputation of the college." "Yes," Soames nearly shouted, pacing the room in agitation. "This is precisely why I have come to you. Your discretion is unmatched, Holmes, and your insight is legendary. I beg you, please do what you can." Holmes let out a reluctant sigh. Away from Baker Street, without his familiar clutter of papers, chemicals, and the cozy chaos that usually suited him, he was clearly at ill ease. Yet he shrugged and motioned for Soames to continue. The tutor spoke rapidly, waving his hands, as if the gestures themselves might somehow release the tension he carried. "Tomorrow," Soames began, "is the first day of the examination for the Fortescue Scholarship. I am one of the examiners, responsible for Greek. The first paper is a translation exercise, a passage the candidates have never seen. Naturally, any advance knowledge would be a monumental advantage. This is why the secrecy surrounding the papers is absolute. Today, around 3 o'clock, the proofs arrived from the printers. The exercise covers half a chapter of Thucydides. I had to review it carefully. Every word must be exact. By 4:30 I had not yet finished. I had promised to take tea with a friend, so I left the proofs on my desk and stepped out for just over an hour. You must understand, Mr. Holmes, that our college doors are double, the inner door of green baize, the outer a heavy oak. As I approached my outer door, I was stunned to see a key in it. At first I thought perhaps I had left mine, but a check of my pockets revealed it was still there. The only other key in existence, to my knowledge, belonged to my servant, Bannister, a man of 10 years' service whose honesty has never been questioned.
It turned out that the key in the door was indeed Bannister's. He had briefly entered the room to see if his master desired tea, and in his haste he had carelessly left the key behind. Normally, such a trivial oversight would have been harmless, but on this fateful day it set the stage for disaster. The moment Soames glanced at his desk, he realized something dreadful had occurred. The proofs, printed on 3 long slips, were no longer neatly stacked. One lay on the floor, another rested on the side table by the window, and the last remained where he had left it. Holmes stirred for the first time, eyes glinting with that familiar spark of deduction. The first page on the floor, the second by the window, the third in its original place, he observed calmly. Soames blinked in astonishment. "Exactly, Mr. Holmes. How could you possibly know that?" "Please continue your account," Holmes prompted, voice smooth yet intense. For a fleeting moment Soames suspected Bannister of violating the trust he had long held, but the loyal servant protested with heartfelt sincerity. Convinced of his honesty, Soames considered the only remaining possibility. Someone else must have noticed the key, seen the tutor absent, and seized the chance to examine the papers. With the scholarship's generous prize at stake, a desperate student might risk everything for an unfair advantage. Bannister had been nearly undone by the discovery. He collapsed into a chair, shaking, and Soames gave him a small measure of brandy to steady his nerves while he inspected the room with meticulous care. It didn't take long to uncover further signs of the intruder. Shreds of pencil shaving scattered across the table by the window, and a broken tip of lead lying amidst the chaos. Clearly the culprit had hurried through the copying, snapping a pencil in the process and frantically sharpening it to continue the illicit work. "Excellent!" Holmes exclaimed, a spark of enthusiasm returning to his eyes as the case gripped him. "Fortune has indeed smiled upon you." Soames nodded, though his worry was far from gone. "But that is not all. I have a new writing table with a smooth red leather surface. Bannister and I can swear it was flawless until today. Now I find a deep, clean cut across it, nearly 3 inches long. Not a mere scratch, but a deliberate incision. And there's more. On the table I discovered a small ball of black clay, flecked with something resembling sawdust. I am certain these are the marks left by the person who rifled through my papers. There are no footprints, no other clues to the intruder's identity. I was at my wits' end until the thought struck me. You were in town, Holmes. I came straight to you. Please, I beg you to help. Either I uncover the culprit or the examination must be delayed until new papers are prepared, which would ignite a scandal clouding not just the college, but the entire university. Above all, I wish for discretion." Holmes rose, donning his overcoat, the familiar energy of deduction pulsing in his movements. "I shall look into it and offer what guidance I can. The case is by no means devoid of interest. Did anyone visit your room after the papers arrived?" "Yes," Soames replied, his brow furrowed. "A young Indian student, Dolit Ras, who lives on the same stair, called in to ask a few questions about the examination." "For which he was registered?" "Yes." "And the papers, they were on your table?" "To the best of my knowledge, they were rolled up." "Recognizable as proofs, perhaps?" "Possibly." "No other visitors?" "None." "Did anyone know the proofs would be there?" Holmes asked sharply. "No one," Soames replied, voice tight. "Only the printer." "And Bannister?" "No, certainly not. No one knew." "Where is Bannister now?" "He's quite ill, poor fellow. I left him collapsed in the chair. I was in such a hurry to come to you." "You left your door open?" "I locked the papers first." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Then it seems clear, Mr. Soames, unless the Indian student recognized the roll as proofs, the person who tampered with them must have stumbled upon them completely by accident, unaware of what they were handling." "So it seems to me," Soames admitted, worry etched across his face. Holmes's lips curled into that enigmatic smile he always wore when a puzzle teased him. "Well, Watson, this will be one of our mental cases, brain work, not brawn. Come along if you wish, and now, Mr. Soames, at your service." The tutor's sitting room opened through a long, low, latticed window onto the ancient, lichen-stained courtyard of the old college. A Gothic-arched door led to a worn stone staircase, and above, 3 students each occupied a floor. Twilight had already settled when we arrived. Holmes paused, his sharp eyes scanning the window. Then, on tiptoe, neck craned, he peered intently inside the room. "He must have entered through the door," he muttered. "There is no other opening except this single pane." "Dear me," Holmes said, smiling oddly at Watson. "Well, if we learn nothing from outside, we had best step in." Soames unlocked the outer door and ushered us into his room. We lingered at the threshold while Holmes meticulously examined the carpet, eyes flicking to every detail, searching for the invisible trail of a hurried intruder. "I see no traces here," Holmes said, surveying the room with a keen eye. "On a day this dry, one could hardly hope for any. Your servant seems recovered. He was left in a chair, you said. Which one?" "By the window," Soames replied.
"Ah, yes, near this little table," Holmes murmured. "Come in now. I've finished with the carpet. Let's examine the table itself. Naturally, what occurred is fairly straightforward. The intruder took the papers, one by one, from the central table and carried them over to the table by the window. From there, he could watch the courtyard, ready to escape at the first sign of your return." "So it seems," said Soames, "though in truth he couldn't have escaped that way. I entered through the side door." "Ah, excellent. Still, that was likely his intention. Now, let me see the 3 slips. No fingerprints, none at all. He carried the first over, copied it. How long would that have taken, using every possible contraction? 15 minutes at the very least. Then he tossed it aside and seized the next. He was in the middle of copying it when your sudden return forced a frantic retreat, so hurried that he left no sign of having been there." "I didn't hear any footsteps on the stair," admitted Soames. "Exactly. He wrote so furiously that the pencil broke. You noticed it needed sharpening. This is significant, Watson. The pencil was unusual, larger than normal, soft lead, dark blue exterior with the maker's name in silver lettering. Only about 1.5 inches remains. Find such a pencil, Mr. Soames, and you will have your culprit. And if I add that he carries a large, blunt knife, you have another clue to aid you." Soames looked bewildered by the flood of detail. "I can follow most of what you say," he said, "but this matter of the pencil, its length, really—" Holmes held up a tiny fragment of pencil, the letters NN etched clearly, followed by a strip of bare wood. "Do you see it?" he asked. "No, I fear I don't," Soames admitted. "Watson, I have underestimated you," Holmes murmured with a rare smile. "But there is more here. NN. What could it mean? It appears at the end of a word. Johann Faber is the most common maker's name, is it not? Notice how much of the pencil remains, exactly what follows Johann." He tilted the fragment toward the electric light, inspecting it carefully. "I had hoped that if the paper were thin, some trace of the writing might have impressed upon this polished surface. But no, there is nothing. Nothing further to learn here." He moved to the central table. "And this small pellet," he said, picking up the black, doughy mass from the table. "I presume this is the object you mentioned. roughly pyramidal, hollowed slightly with specks of sawdust. Fascinating. And this cut, yes, a definite tear, begins with a thin scratch, ends in a jagged hole. Intriguing indeed. Mr. Soames, I am much obliged for bringing this case to my attention. Now, tell me, where does this door lead? To my bedroom. Have you been in it since the incident? No, I came straight here for you. Holmes smiled faintly. Excellent. I shall take a quick look around. What a delightfully old-fashioned room. Please wait here while I inspect the floor. Nothing of note. And the curtain. You hang clothes behind it, yes? If anyone were hiding, that would be the obvious spot. The bed is too low, the wardrobe too shallow. No one concealed there, I presume. As Holmes drew back the curtain, his posture stiffened slightly, his movements alert and ready for any sudden surprise. The space revealed nothing more than 3 or 4 suits hanging neatly on pegs. Holmes turned away, eyes scanning the floor. "Halloa! What's this?" he exclaimed suddenly. On the floor lay a small pyramid of black, putty-like substance, identical to the one on the study table. Holmes held it up in the glare of the electric light, examining it with the intensity of a man who had just discovered a crucial clue.
"Your visitor," Holmes remarked, holding up the black pellet, "appears to have left traces in your bedroom as well as your sitting room, Mr. Soames." Soames frowned. "But what could he have wanted in there?" Holmes's eyes gleamed with insight. "It seems quite simple. You returned by an unexpected route, and he had no warning until you were practically at the door. What could he do? He seized everything that might betray him and dashed into your bedroom to hide himself." "So you mean to tell me," Soames exclaimed, incredulous, "that all the while I was talking to Bannister in this room, the man was a prisoner in my very house, if only we had known it?" "That is exactly how it appears," Holmes replied coolly. "So there's surely another possibility," Soames pressed. "Did you notice my bedroom window?" Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Lattice-paned, lead framework, 3 separate windows, one swinging on a hinge, large enough for a man to enter." "Exactly," Soames said. "It looks out onto an angle of the courtyard, partially hidden from view. The intruder could have entered there, left traces in the bedroom as he passed, and then, seeing the door open, escaped that way." Holmes shook his head impatiently. "Let us be practical. You say 3 students use this stair and often pass your door." "Yes, all 3 of them." "And they are all sitting this examination?" "Yes." "Do you suspect any one of them more than the others?" Soames hesitated, his face uneasy. "It is a delicate matter. One hardly likes to cast suspicion without proof. Tell me your thoughts. I will take care of the proofs." "Very well," Soames said carefully. "I will describe the 3 men who inhabit these rooms. The first, on the lower floor, is Gilchrist, a scholar and athlete. He plays rugby and cricket for the college and has earned his blue for hurdles and the long jump, a fine, manly fellow. His father, the notorious Sir Jabez Gilchrist, ruined himself on the turf. Young Gilchrist has been left with very little, yet he is hard-working and diligent. He will do well in life." "The second floor," Soames continued, "is occupied by Dowlett Ross, the Indian student. Quiet, inscrutable, just as many of them are. He is thorough and meticulous, though Greek remains his weak spot. Steady, methodical, but unassuming." "And the top floor?" Holmes prompted. "Miles McLaren," a shudder crossed his face. "A brilliant mind, one of the sharpest in the university, but wayward, dissipated, and unprincipled. He nearly faced expulsion over a card scandal in his first year. This term he has idled away, and now he must face the examination with dread." "So you mean he is the one you suspect?" "I dare not go that far," Soames admitted. "But of the 3, he is perhaps the least unlikely." "Exactly," Holmes said. "Now, let us turn to your servant, Bannister."
Bannister appeared, small, pale-faced, clean-shaven, with grizzled hair that betrayed his 50. This sudden upheaval had clearly shaken him. His round face twitched nervously, and his hands could not stay still.
"We are investigating this unfortunate business, Bannister," his master said gently. "Yes, sir," he replied, voice tight with tension. Holmes's eyes sharpened. "I understand you left the key in the door." "Yes, sir." "Extraordinary," Holmes said slowly, "that this should happen on the very day these papers were in the room." "It was most unfortunate, sir," Bannister admitted, "though I have done the same at other times." "When did you enter the room?" "About 4:30, Mr. Soames's tea time." "How long did you stay?" "When I saw he was absent, I withdrew immediately." "Did you glance at the papers on the table?" "No, sir, certainly not." "And how did you come to leave the key in the door?" "I had the tea tray in my hand and thought to return for the key, then I forgot." "Has the outer door a spring lock?" Holmes asked sharply. "No, sir." "Then it remained open the entire time?" "Yes, sir." "Anyone in the room could leave freely?" "Yes, sir." "And when Mr. Soames returned and called for you, you were quite unsettled?" "Yes, sir. Nothing like this has ever happened in all my years here. I nearly fainted." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Where were you when you first felt unwell?" "Here, near the door, sir." "That is peculiar," said Holmes, "because you ended up sitting in that chair by the corner. Why pass the other chairs?" "I don't know, sir. It didn't matter to me where I sat." Lean leaned toward Holmes. "He seems genuinely unaware of much, Holmes, quite ghastly to look at." Holmes nodded. "You remained here when your master left?" "Only for a minute, sir. Then I locked the door and returned to my room." "Whom do you suspect?" "Oh, I would not presume, sir. I cannot believe any gentleman in this university would stoop to such conduct. No, sir, I simply cannot believe it." "Very well, that will suffice. One last question. Have you mentioned to any of the 3 students that something is amiss?" "No, sir, not a word." "Have you seen any of them?" "No, sir." "Excellent. Now, Mr. Soames, if you please, we shall take a walk in the quadrangle." Outside, 3 squares of golden light glowed against the encroaching twilight. "Your 3 birds are safely in their nests," Holmes remarked, glancing upward. Then his sharp eyes caught movement. "Hello! One seems rather restless." The Indian student, Daulat Ras, appeared suddenly in silhouette against his blind, pacing briskly back and forth in his room, a shadow of unease against the fading light. "I should like to have a peep at each of them," Holmes said, eyes glinting with curiosity. "Is that possible?" "No difficulty at all," Soames replied. "These rooms are the oldest in the college, and it's not unusual for visitors to inspect them. Come along, I'll personally show you." "No names, please," Holmes added as we knocked at Gilchrist's door. A tall, flaxen-haired, slim young man opened it, his expression cautious at first, but warm once he understood our purpose. Inside, the rooms were a treasure trove of medieval domestic architecture, curved beams, tiny alcoves, and quaint features that caught Holmes' immediate attention. So charmed was he by one particular detail that he drew it in his notebook, broke his pencil in the process, borrowed one from the young man, and finally borrowed a knife to sharpen his own. The same curious scene repeated in Daulat Ras's room, a quiet, hook-nosed young man who watched us warily and clearly breathed a sigh of relief when Holmes's architectural fascination finally drew to a close. In neither room did Holmes appear to discover the clue he sought. It was only at the 3rd room that our visit met with resistance. The outer door refused to open to our knock, and from behind it came nothing but a torrent of angry expletives. "I don't care who you are. You can go to blazes. Tomorrow's the exam, and no one will distract me." "A rude fellow," Soames muttered, reddening with anger as we descended the staircase. He did not know it was I knocking, yet his conduct was discourteous and, given the circumstances, rather suspicious. Holmes's reply was quiet but sharp.
"Can you tell me his exact height?" he asked. Soames hesitated. "Really, Mr. Holmes, I can't be precise. Taller than the Indian, shorter than Gilchrist. About 5'6", I suppose." "That is very important," Holmes said, a glint of satisfaction in his eye. "And now, Mr. Soames, I wish you good night." Our guide's voice rose in alarm. "Good gracious, Mr. Holmes, surely you cannot leave me like this. Don't you realize the position? Tomorrow is the examination. I must take some action tonight. I cannot allow it to proceed if even one of the papers has been tampered with. The situation demands a solution." "You must leave everything as it is," Holmes replied calmly. "I shall drop by early tomorrow morning and review the matter. By then I may be able to suggest a course of action. Until that time, you change nothing, absolutely nothing." "So it be, Mr. Holmes," Soames conceded, still flustered. "Rest easy, Mr. Holmes. We will find a solution. I shall take the black clay and the pencil fragments with me. Goodbye." Stepping into the shadowed quadrangle, we glanced up at the windows. The Indian student still paced relentlessly, his silhouette moving like a restless shadow. The others were invisible. "Well, Watson," Holmes said as we emerged onto the main street, "what do you make of it? A little parlor game, a kind of 3-card trick, is it not? There are your 3 men. One of them must be the culprit. Which do you choose?" "The foul-mouthed fellow on the top floor. He has the worst record. Yet that Indian is sly as well. Why else would he pace his room incessantly?" "There is nothing suspicious in that," Holmes said with a faint smile. "Many do it when memorizing material for an examination." He looked at us strangely, I insisted.
Wouldn't you if a flock of strangers burst in while you were cramming for tomorrow's exam, every second counting? Holmes replied. No, that tells us nothing. Pencils, knives, everything seems accounted for. But one person puzzles me still. Who? I asked. Bannister, the servant. What game is he playing in all this? He struck me as an honest man, I said. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly, thoughtful, as we walked on through the empty streets, the mystery settling around us like the night. So he outwitted me, Holmes muttered, his brow furrowed. That's the curious part. Why should a perfectly honest man... Well, here's a large stationer's. We shall begin our investigations here. There were only 4 stationers of any consequence in town. At each, Holmes produced his pencil fragments and asked about ordering a duplicate. Each clerk agreed it could be obtained, but noted that the pencil was unusual, seldom kept in stock. Holmes, however, seemed unruffled by his lack of success. He merely shrugged with a half-amused resignation. "No luck, my dear Watson," he said. "This, our best and final clue, has led to nothing. Yet I have little doubt we can build a case without it. By Jove, it's nearly 9, and the landlady was babbling about green peas at 7:30. With your eternal tobacco, Watson, and your irregular meals, I expect we shall both be given notice to quit. Still, not before we solve the problem of the nervous tutor, the careless servant, and the 3 enterprising students." Holmes made no further comment on the matter that evening, though he remained lost in thought long after our belated dinner. At 8 the next morning, he appeared in my room just as I was finishing my morning routine. "Well, Watson, it's time we went down to St. Luke's. Can you do without breakfast?" "Certainly." "Soames will be in a dreadful fidget until we can give him something definite." "Do you have anything definite to tell him?" I asked. "I think so," Holmes said with a faint smile. "You have reached a conclusion?" "Yes, my dear Watson. I have solved the mystery." "But what new evidence could you possibly have obtained?" "Aha! It is not without purpose that I rose at the unholy hour of 6. 2 hours of hard work and at least 5 miles covered. And look at this." He extended his hand. Resting in his palm were 3 small pyramids of black, doughy clay.
"Why, Holmes," I exclaimed, "yesterday you had only 2. "And 1 more this morning," Holmes said, holding up the small pyramid. "A fair argument, Watson. Wherever number 3 came from must also be the source of numbers 1 and 2, eh? Well, come along and let us put our friend Soames out of his misery." We found the unfortunate tutor in a state of pitiable agitation. The examination was only hours away, yet he remained torn between exposing the facts and allowing the culprit to compete for the coveted scholarship. He could hardly stand still, pacing and wringing his hands, until he spotted Holmes and ran towards him, desperation written plainly on his face.
"Thank heaven you've come. I feared you had given up in despair. What am I to do? Shall the examination proceed?" "Yes, let it proceed," Holmes said calmly. "But this rascal," Soames began. "He shall not compete," Holmes interrupted. "You know him?" "I think so. If this matter is not to become public, we must assume certain powers, resolve ourselves into a small private court-martial. You there, Soames. Watson, you here. I shall take the central chair. I believe our appearance is now sufficiently imposing to strike terror into a guilty heart. Kindly ring the bell." Bannister entered, his eyes widening in evident surprise and fear at our solemn, almost judicial formation. "You will close the door, please," Holmes instructed. "Now, Bannister, will you tell us the truth about yesterday's incident?" The man's face went pale, nearly drained of color. "I have told you everything, sir," he stammered. "Nothing to add?" "Nothing is all, sir." Holmes leaned forward, his gaze sharp as a scalpel. "Well then, I must make a suggestion. When you sat in that chair yesterday, did you do so to conceal some object, something that would reveal who had been in the room?" Bannister's face turned ghastly, the color fleeing completely as the weight of the question settled upon him. "No, sir, certainly not," Bannister said, his voice trembling. "It is only a suggestion," Holmes said smoothly, his tone almost gentle. "I freely admit I cannot prove it, but it seems highly probable that the moment Mr. Soames's back was turned, you released the man hiding in that bedroom." Bannister licked his dry lips, his nerves clearly fraying. "There was no man, sir," he insisted. "Ah, that's a pity, Bannister. Up to now you may have spoken the truth, but now I know you have lied." The man's face hardened in sullen defiance. "There was no man, sir," he repeated. "Come, come, Bannister," Holmes pressed. "No, sir, there was no one," Bannister said firmly. "Very well," Holmes said, leaning back slightly. "Then you can give us no further information. Remain in the room, please. Stand over there near the bedroom door. Now, Soames, I shall ask you to do the courtesy of fetching young Gilchrist and bringing him down here." Moments later, the tutor returned with the student. Gilchrist was a striking figure, tall, lithe, and agile, moving with a spring in his step, a pleasant openness in his features. Yet his troubled blue eyes betrayed his inner fear, and they finally settled on Bannister in the far corner, wide with horror and disbelief. "Just close the door," Holmes instructed. "Now, Mr. Gilchrist, we are entirely alone here. No one outside this room need ever know a word of what passes. We can speak frankly. Tell us, Mr. Gilchrist, how it came to pass that an honorable man such as yourself would commit the act of yesterday." The young man staggered backward, horror and reproach flashing across his face at Bannister. "No, no, Mr. Gilchrist, sir, I never said a word, never one word," the servant cried desperately. "No, but now you have," Holmes said quietly, "and you must see, sir, that after Bannister's words your position is hopeless. Your only recourse now is a full and frank confession." For a moment Gilchrist raised his hands, trying in vain to control the torment etched across his features. Then, unable to bear it any longer, he sank to his knees beside the table. Burying his face in his hands, he broke into a storm of passionate, uncontrollable sobbing. "Come, come," said Holmes kindly, his tone softening. "To err is human, and at least no one can accuse you of being a callous criminal. Perhaps it will be easier if I simply recount what I have deduced, Mr. Soames, and you can correct me where I am wrong. Shall I do so? No need to answer. Just listen, and see that I do you no injustice. From the moment you told me that no one, not even Bannister, could have known the papers were in your room, the case began to take shape in my mind. The printer could be dismissed immediately. He could examine the papers in his own office without issue. The Indian student, too, seemed irrelevant. If the proofs were in a roll, he could not possibly recognize them. But what could not be dismissed was the audacity of the intruder, and the timing, the papers appearing on the table that very day. It was no mere coincidence. The man who entered knew exactly where to look. The question was, how? When I examined your window, I amused myself with the idea you suggested, that someone could have forced their way in broad daylight under the gaze of all the opposite rooms. Absurd. No, I was measuring the height required for a man to see, as he passed, what lay upon the central table. I am 6 feet tall and could barely manage it. Any man shorter would have no chance. Already I had reason to suspect that if one of your 3 students possessed unusual height, he would be the one to watch most closely. I entered, and we discussed the side table. The central table eluded me until you mentioned Gilchrist's prowess as a long-distance jumper. At that instant, the entire solution came into focus. Only a few corroborating details were needed, and they were quickly obtained. Here is what happened. The young man spent his afternoon at the athletic grounds practicing the jump. He returned carrying his jumping shoes, which, as you know, are fitted with several sharp spikes. As he passed your window, Holmes continued, his eyes sharp and gleaming with satisfaction, his great height allowed him to see the proofs laid out upon your table. He immediately guessed their significance. Nothing would have come of it had it not been for the key left in the door by your servant's carelessness. In that instant, a sudden impulse seized him. He entered merely to see if the papers were indeed the proofs. It was not a daring exploit. He could always claim he had only come to ask a question. But the temptation proved too strong. Upon realizing they were the proofs, he yielded completely. He placed his shoes on the table. Yes, the very shoes he had been wearing. And what, may I ask, did you place on that chair near the window? Gloves, Gilchrist admitted, his voice barely above a whisper.
Holmes turned triumphantly to Bannister. He put his gloves on the chair and then began copying the proofs, sheet by sheet. He believed the tutor would return by the main gate and that he would be observed. But, as we know, the tutor came by the side gate instead. At that moment, the young man heard him at the very door. No escape was possible. In his panic, he forgot his gloves, snatched up his shoes, and darted into the bedroom. You can see from the scratch on the table, it begins shallow and deepens toward the bedroom door. That alone proves the shoe was dragged in that direction. The culprit had taken refuge there. The black clay around the spikes was left on the table, and a second sample was dislodged and fell into the bedroom. This morning I visited the athletic grounds myself and observed that the jumping pit is lined with tenacious black clay, sprinkled with fine sawdust to prevent slipping. I took a sample and compared it. Have I spoken the truth, Mr. Gilchrist? The student drew himself up, pale but honest. Yes, sir, it is true, he admitted, his voice steady now. Good heavens! Have you nothing to add? Cried Soames, still aghast at the revelation. Yes, sir, I have something to say, Gilchrist admitted, still trembling from the shock of exposure. But the humiliation of being caught so disgracefully has left me bewildered. I wrote a letter to you, Mr. Soames, in the early hours of this restless morning, before I knew my fault had been discovered. Here it is. You will see that I wrote, I have determined not to sit for the examination. I have been offered a commission in the Rhodesian police, and I shall depart for South Africa at once." "So you never intended to profit by your unfair advantage," Soames said, relief and admiration mingling in his tone. "I am glad to hear it. But why did you ultimately change your mind?" Gilchrist's hand drifted toward Bannister. "There is the man who guided me back to the right path," he said quietly. Holmes turned to the servant with a penetrating look. "Come now, Bannister. It must be clear to you from all I have said that only you could have let this young man out of the room. You were alone with him and must have locked the door when you went out. Escape through the window? Impossible. Now, please clear up the final mystery. Tell us why you acted as you did." Bannister straightened, his grizzled face stern but proud. "It is simple enough, sir, though impossible for anyone, however clever, to have known. There was a time when I served old Sir Jabez Gilchrist, this young gentleman's father. When he fell from fortune, I came here to the college, but I never forgot my old master, even when he was down. I watched over his son as best I could, for the sake of those old days. Well, sir, yesterday, when the alarm was raised and I entered the room, the very first thing I saw were Mr. Gilchrist's tan gloves lying on that chair. I knew them well. I understood at once what they meant. I knew the young man's heart and his impulse, and I knew I could prevent greater harm. So I acted. If Mr. Soames had seen the proofs, the game would have been over. So I plopped myself down in that chair and wouldn't move until Mr. Soames went off to fetch you. Then out came my young master, the very boy I had once dandled on my knee, and he confessed everything to me. Wasn't it only natural, sir, that I should save him? And wasn't it just as natural that I should speak to him as his father would have, guiding him to understand that no good could come from such a deed? Could anyone truly blame me, sir?" Holmes sprang to his feet, a rare smile lighting his face. "No, indeed. Well, Mr. Soames, I believe your little problem is now resolved, and as for us, breakfast waits at home. Come along, Watson." He turned to the young student, his eyes kind but penetrating. "And you, sir, may a bright future await you in Rhodesia. Today you have fallen low, but let us see how high you may rise tomorrow." The room, once thick with tension and unease, now breathed relief. The crisis was over, the culprit reformed, and justice had been served, quietly, discreetly, and without scandal. Holmes' sharp mind had again turned chaos into clarity.
And thus the story ended. If you liked this journey into the worlds of classic literature, do not forget to support us by subscribing so we can tell you more. And hey, if there's a classic tale you'd love to hear told in this suspenseful style, drop its name in the comments below. Your suggestion might be our next chilling adventure.